Today's video is going to be my December wrap-up. Now, for me, December was one of the best reading months. I read a total of 21 books in the month of December. Exciting. Somewhere at the end of November, I ended up reaching my Goodreads goal, which was 50 books. And I was really happy. And so I mentally was like, okay, I'm going to increase it. And instead of just like going 10 more books, I had to go above and beyond. And I increased it to 80. I didn't reach 80 books, but I did get to 74. In the month of December, I was mainly reading ebooks and audiobooks. I only read 3 physical copy books. And those are the 3 books I'm going to show you guys first. So I have Goodreads on my phone, and that's what I used to film, so I'm not able to see it. So I have it on my laptop, and I'm bad with names. So I have like the names of important characters written down over here. So if you see me looking down, that is what I'm looking at. But here are the 3 books, the 3 physical copy books that I read in December. The first book is Smart Blood Sugar. I am a diabetic, and I was reading this book to find different methods to control my sugars. I did find different supplements I want to get into to see if those help lower my A1C. And one thing that I found interesting in this book was that she mentioned that like nutritionists, which my nutritionist suggested that I eat 40 grams per meal. And she was like, that's not going to help reverse the illness. Like, you need to eat 60 grams per day. So it's basically like a keto lifestyle. If you count carbs, you know how hard that is. So I'm on the verge of transitioning into eating something more similar and following along the guidelines of this book. Second book I ended up reading is The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success. Now, it took me a minute to pick this book up because someone's really negative about the book. Like, they were just saying it was really redundant and they just didn't like it, which led me not to pick the book up for a long time. And when I finally got a hold of it, I really loved it. I do feel like a lot of self-help spiritual books do reference to the same things, but it's like one of those things where like something is repetitive over and over, it's so it can stick with you. And sometimes when someone else says something to you, the way they say it might resonate more with you than someone else. But for me, this was a 5-star read. This book was hard for me to rate because I realized I didn't say how many stars I gave it, but this book is hard for me to rate because it's more so like it's more like a textbook. Do you really rate a textbook? No, I mean, it's not as thick as one, but it's informative. The last physical copy book I read is The Lunar Alchemy. Now, this does have to do with moon magic, and I know that's not something a lot of people are into, but this book does have a lot of writing prompts, and they do tell you about like what the different phases of the moon represents, or like what's best to do during that phase of the moon. So that's why I would recommend this book for people, even if they don't want to get into like dip and dabble with the moon magic. Like, for instance, the new moon is with like manifestation, setting new intentions. The waning phases for letting go. And the full moon, they say like, sit with your dark side to see the light. So it has stuff like that in here. I feel like it's really good, even though I know it's not something everyone would like to read. Really proud of myself. I know I keep saying it, but I keep wanting to say 22, but I think it's 21 books. That's like the most books I've ever read in a month. So for me, that's a milestone. The first ebook that I read is The Guest List by Lucy Foley. At first, this book was really hard for me to rate. I did end up giving it 3 stars, the first ebook. So I actually ended up listening to this as an audiobook, which I do feel like was much easier to get through than actually reading it. The Guest List has to follow a wedding the night before, and then the events that lead up to someone getting murdered. It has the viewpoints of the bridesmaid, the best man, I think the wife's perspective, or like the bride's perspective, gets thrown in there at times. And then you have the +1, which is the bride's best friend's wife. One of the reasons why this book was hard for me to rate, because it had good aspects about it. I did like that it had the multiple point of views, everybody's side of the story of what's going on and what happened. But for me, when a book starts to throw in too many twists, it just kind of gets like the first twist of the book did really get me, and so did like a couple of others, but I just felt like it was just too much going on personally for me. Like, it wasn't a bad book. A lot of people love this book, but for me it was just like, after I got to the ending and we find out who's murdered and who was the murderer, it was just like, you could have took it anywhere, and I more than likely wanted to be someone else. But the next book I ended up reading was That D Hit Different When He Broke. And yes, that is the name of the book. It is by Shanice B and Shantae Moore. Now, what the book is about is basically in the title. We have these two successful women who are basically dating men who don't have anything going for themselves. And at one point, it was really hard for me to get through, because like the men in this book were extremely unlikable. Like, yes, the authors did a good job at portraying those male characters, but it was one point in the book where the one girl's dude wrecked her car, and so she gave him like the insurance money to go get her car fixed, and he took it to like a side mechanic that was gonna do it for half the price. He ended up like butchering the job, and the additional money he used to go buy him and her a chain. So like for me, since the characters were so unlikable, I knew personally I was gonna rate this book low, but it wasn't that it was a bad book. The book just wasn't for me, and I didn't like any characters. So if I do have to give this book some stars, it's gonna be 2. Next book I ended up reading is Never Should Have Loved You by Shanice B. I'm really liking that book much more. I ended up giving it 5 stars. So this book has to follow. So we have our main character, Kendra, who has a baby daddy named Keyshawn. Of course, she ends up having some baby daddy drama. She then becomes the escort to help provide for her son. One night, she ends up meeting up with this attorney, and later in the book, her dad then hires this same attorney to represent her in the case against her baby daddy. Now we have drama, spice, romance. It had a lot of great aspects to the book. I would definitely check this book out. So the next book I ended up reading was Verity by Colleen Hoover. I'm not going to say what I rated it because I do have another video coming out about that book. Everybody's talking about Verity, and the main thing they say when they talk about this book is the ending. Well, you're going to have to wait until my next video to see what I rate that one. The next book I ended up reading is This Poison Heart by Kaylin Byron. I ended up giving this book 4 stars, but I don't know if it's more so like 3.53. I really did like this book. This book follows Verity, who is a young woman who has like these magical abilities with like the trees and flowers, and keeping this a secret her whole life, until one day this woman comes along, and she and her long lost aunt that she didn't know about leaves her this manor. So her and her 2 moms move into the manor and start to uncover a lot of secrets about Versace's and her family tree. This book has a lot of Greek mythology references. This book had a lot of things that I like. The Greek mythology, the apothecary. Started to have issues with certain decisions that the main character was making, and that's why I'm personally don't feel like I can give this book 4 stars. The second book does come out in June, and I will be reading it and continuing the series. The next book I ended up reading is Our Little Secret by Kristen, one of those. I really love this book. I ended up giving the book 5 stars. This book follows a group of friends who have been friends since they were young, and each of them have this unknown secret revolving the lake that they live around. And as the story goes on, each person's secret ends up getting revealed, which is crazy. By the time we get to the end of the book, the ending was unexpected, and it really got me to the point where the book had to get 5 stars. It's great. It's crazy. The next book I ended up reading is called The Hate File by C. Hallman. I ended up giving this book 5 stars as well. This book is considered a dark romance, and I didn't know I was into dark romances until I read this book. It follows Penny, who ends up getting into it with like a biker gang where she owes them money, and before they have her repay her debt, this dude from her past, Ryder, comes along, and for her to be able to repay the debt, he's like, you know, you gonna come with me and that's how you gonna pay off the debt. And of course, like, a romance does transpire between them. We say dark romances aren't for everybody, because certain things in the book can trigger you. It can eventually be too hard for you to get through. The next book I ended up listening to is called The Couple Next Door. Now, I didn't like this book at all. I ended up giving it 1 star. I don't know why I was so harsh with the book, because it's not that bad, but it was that bad for me. This book follows a married couple who were at their neighbor's dinner party. When they return home from the neighbor's dinner party, they find out that their baby daughter was kidnapped. So throughout the whole book, you basically see the investigation of them trying to find what happened to the couple's daughter, who was involved, was she kidnapped, why was she kidnapped. For me, what I didn't like about it was the storyline, so it was hard for me to give it a good review. I didn't like anything about it, and it was really hard for me to get through. The husband was very unlikable as a character. He had a very victim mentality, to the point where it was just like, And so I was 80% into this book when I wanted to DNF it, but I'm just like, I'm already here, and I find even if I'm not enjoying a book, if I have it as audiobook, it's easy for me to finish it because I can just keep it playing and do other stuff, and it doesn't feel like I'm reading it. So the next book I ended up reading was called Master Your Emotions, and I ended up giving this 5 stars. I feel like everyone should read this book. It has a lot of good insights on how to control emotions and how to process hard emotions when you encounter them. Next book I ended up reading was If You Tell by Greg Olson. Now, I ended up giving this book 4 stars, but if you know what this book is about, I kind of messed up because I was listening to it as an audiobook. And when I listen to audiobooks, I'm doing other things. So I had this book playing while I was cooking, while I'm at the store trying to get groceries. And I think this book wasn't the right time to be listening to that, because this book is really disturbing. This book is about a woman who basically abuses and tortures her children and some of her closest friends. It has to deal with murder. It goes from the timeline when her kids were younger into good adulthood. It's crazy because one of her husbands who actually partook in the abuse is out from prison, so that's weird. The next book I ended was Passive Incomes of Ideas for 2020. I didn't really like this book because they said this book is like a how-to step guide, and it's not that at all. So it's not what I was looking for, and the title all off because that's not what it's about. It had like random different ideas, I'll give you that, but it wasn't like a how-to like it says in the title. It was more so like, here's the pros, here's the cons, do it if you want to, and I was looking more for some guidance. The next book I ended up reading is called Nasty Time, Volume 1, Shameless Reflections to Alchemize Sexual Experiences. This book is about a woman who is disconnected from her sexuality and sensuality, and basically reclaiming that and stepping to embracing herself as a woman. I really did enjoy this book. It does have writing prompts. I feel like if you experience disconnect in your sacral area, this is a book that probably a good book to get into to read. It's definitely not for everybody. I'm actually the only person who shelved this book in 2021. So the next book I ended up reading was Husband for Sale by B.M. Harden. Now, I struggle between if I want to give this book 4 or 3 stars. For me, if the characters aren't likable, it's harder for it to get what I was expecting from this book, because what it has to deal with is directly in the title. So we have Nima, who is unsatisfied in her life, in her career, and she doesn't feel like she's where she's supposed to be at. things kind of like the discomfort that Nima was having in herself rolls over into her marriage, to the point where she feels like she's unhappy there too. Her husband is supposed to be like the greatest husband you can ever have. And so people are like, if you don't want him, I'll have him. So she then ends up auctioning off her husband. You see a spiral of events, a chain of events. So the next book I end up listening to is called Behind Closed Doors by B.A. Paris. I end up giving this book 4 stars, but it's more so probably a 3. I can't remember the first half of the book. That's why I probably need to be a 3-star, because I don't know what's going on. Can't tell you how the book start. All I know is when the book did grab my attention, it was after the couple get married, which is the husband name is Jack, the wife's name is Grace. So after they get married, Grace finds out she has no idea who she married. And Jack ends up actually being an extremely abusive husband that's like holding her captive. And it's kind of crazy because Jack is like a very successful defense attorney for battered women. So then the book goes to show how she's dealing with the abuse and how she wants to plan to get away from her husband. I kind of read a lot of books like that. So I'm finding the more like I keep reading books that are around the same idea, it kind of, you really have to come with a good one for it to stand out against all the other ones that I'm reading. But yeah, so I see a bad review, can't really remember the book, so we're gonna give it this. The next book I end up reading is These Witches Don't Burn by Isabel Sterling. This follows Hannah, who is a young element witch holder in Salem, and she starts to feel like people are out to get her coven. So you see her trying to figure out what is the threat to her coven. Ends up holding like a ritual while they're at a party, and she doesn't know if like blood witches are out to get her. It has LGBT representation as well. It was a lot of things that were very predictable throughout the book. Like when they were looking through, like when they were looking for the threat to their coven, I'm like, I already know who it is. I know who it is. And I was right. So it was just like, I didn't have to finish reading this book to tell you, you know. But I think the reason why I didn't like this book that much, because it is more so like a YA book than anything. The next book I end up reading is The Cellar by Natasha Person. Now, I ended up reading her last book, and I wasn't really a fan of that. So when I'm reading The Cellar, it follows this young woman who gets kidnapped. I'm like, okay, here we go again. But I did like this one more than The Lost. This has to deal with Summer, who ends up getting kidnapped by this named Colin. He then holds her in the basement with these other women as well. You see the different experiences that these women go through while they're held in captive by this man. I did like this much more because I'm really into Criminal Minds, and you kind of see more so in depth what someone goes through or what they went through in this and what they had to do to survive. I don't think I'm going to continue with that book. For some odd reason, the way Tasha makes the ending in her books, I'm not really a fan of her endings. So I wasn't left pulled in to want to read the second book, to be honest with you. But if you do like the book, I would recommend go ahead and reading the second one and tell me how it is, because I ain't gonna do it. The next book I ended up reading was We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. Now, I ended up giving this book 4 stars. This is a very popular book on TikTok where people are like, oh my god, this book is phenomenal, this book is stunning. I did listen to this book as an audiobook, which made it easier for me to get through. Now, this book follows a young woman named Cadence whose family is very wealthy, and each summer they go to this island. Summer, when they're on the island, Cadence ends up getting into an accident and she can't remember what happened, and so you start to see her trying to regain her memory of the chain of events that happened that summer. Now, I can see where people say this book is overrated. This book, for me, when I was listening to it, it was like, okay, what's going on here. It really took to get to like the final chapters for it to like pull me in and wow me and make me be like, wow, this book making me emotional. This book is really sitting with me. So if you don't mind a very slow burn and you're a person who really loves the book, if the ending is good, then I would highly recommend you reading this book. If you don't like slow burns and if it takes to the ending for you to fall in love with the book, like if you're someone who needs to be pulled in the whole time, I would tell you not to read this book because it's not going to be for you. But for me, when the ending came, I was really getting a little bit emotional because I'm like, I didn't, what's going on? Like, that was really sad. That did hurt me. I'm like, dang, wow, I didn't expect for that to be going on. So yeah, these are all the 21 books that I read in December. I can't believe I read that many books. I usually only read over the summertime, but I've been trying to make time for reading. And yeah, it's crazy though, because like after reading all these ebooks, I've kind of been in the mood for more so like physical copy books. But then it's like I don't want to sit down and actually read the physical copy books. So I don't know. If you like this video, go ahead, like, subscribe, share, comment. Tell me the books that you read in December. I know my timeline of actually posting this video is going to be like, girl, December 21, you still stuck in it? Because we in 22 and you still ain't posted. But don't do me. I'm going to get on schedule. You know, I prefer having... I'm going on rambling after I already told y'all to subscribe like I was ending the video. But no, I'm a person who would like to wait to the end of the month to finish my wrap-up. Actually, to the next month to fill my wrap-ups to make sure that I get all my books included, because I will be a person to pick a book up on the 30th of the month and try to finish it. So